In this module, we're going to set up a drawing to be printed on a sheet. And here you see in front of you drawings that we have been working on in the last few modules. And what I've done to these drawings is I've brought them together into one file and I've rotated them. Now some of those operations are a little bit beyond what I'd like to do at this point, so we're going to skip over that and I will show you that later on in another module. So what we want to do here though, as I said, is to set up this drawing to be printed. This is the area that we've been drawing in. It's an area that AutoCAD refers to as model space, where you draw your model, all the elements of your model. When you set up a sheet, you do that in another area or on another tab. By default, these tabs are called layouts. And you can see here, if I click on a layout, it'll switch to another view where basically you see a black area and a dotted area, a heavy line, and then your drawing. So this is referred to as a layout. Autodesk refers to this as paper space. Now you can switch back and forth when you're looking at this from model space to paper space simply by clicking in the area outside of this viewport. So if we click over here, you'll notice that the icon changes to a triangle, and that tells you that you're currently working in paper space. So you're not working on the model anymore, you're basically working on your sheet. And just to illustrate this really quickly, if I drew a line across my view like this and went back to model space, you'd notice that that line does not appear here in model space. So that's something that only exists on the paper. What we're looking at here is kind of a default layout, and the distance here between our points, you'll notice, is approximately, and I'll turn ortho back on for a moment, and you'll see here that it's approximately 11. So it's a little bit less than, and approximately 8.5. So you have a 8.5 by 11 sheet. Depending on your drawing, that may or may not be okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through the process of creating a different size sheet. And when you do that with a command called plot. We go through the plot command, and the plot command is actually meant to print your drawing, but also you can set up your sheet in a specific layout. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through a few items in this dialog box. The first thing we're going to do is to set up the plotter type. So the plotter type, if you have something already connected to your computer, I have a 11 by 17 printer, so that's this object here. But most reliably, you'll see this AutoCAD PDF file, and I'll choose here highest quality. So we're going to use that, which means that we're going to send our print to a PDF file, and then the PDF file could be printed later. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to choose a paper size right down here. And as you can see, by default, the paper size is 8.5 by 11, and we're going to scroll up here and find 11 by 17. That's the sheet size we'd like to use. We're going to leave this, that we're going to plot the layout. We're going to use a scale of 1 to 1 because we're setting it up on that size sheet. And what we'll do down here is go to apply to layout. Now, once you do that, you do not have to click OK, and in fact, you shouldn't click on OK, because if you do, it's going to want to send the print out to the printer, and we're not done in our drawing yet. So we're going to click here, Cancel now, and everything is saved because we hit Apply. So we click Cancel, and you'll see here that your sheet is now, in fact, quite a bit larger. So I'm just going to illustrate the size of our sheet here, and you'll see here that we have approximately 1 foot 5 inches, which is 17, and almost 11 in this direction. All right, so the first thing I'd like to do is to draw a border from my sheet, and I'm just going to draw something really simple. And I'm going to start my border 1/2 inch. So I'm going to use a coordinate here to do this, 0.5, 0.5, off the origin of the sheet. Okay, and you can see where that has chosen a point. Then I'm going to draw it up 10 units. So that should be 1/2 unit off the top, and I'll draw it 16 inches long. Okay, and go to complete my sheet like that. Okay, so that's just a basic border, and I'll leave here a 3-inch title block. So I'll offset this far right line 3 inches, and you can see I have a basic border. This object here is called a viewport. Okay, and viewport is basically a view into model space. Now you can adjust this, and we'll do this a little bit more accurately in a moment, to fit whatever size you want. Before we go further though, what I'd like to do is to set up a few layers that we're going to use in this printer setup. I'll move that again just a little more, and I'll set up 2 new layers. Okay, and I'm going to start using another setup for my layers here that are specific to annotation objects. So annotation objects are non-drawing element objects. So a sheet is not part of your drawing. It's not part of your model. As well, this viewport is not really part of your model. So I'm going to create one for the border, and I'm going to also create one for the viewport. Okay, so I created a couple of new layers. I've renamed them, and I'll give them some colors. So for the border, I'll make this a bright color, and for the viewport, I'll make it kind of a darker color, since it's not really important that we see that too clearly. And I'll select, let's say, start with the viewport and set it to its correct layer. And also now my border, I'll select it and set that to the border layer. All right, and let's just turn, oh yes, one thing I didn't do yet was to change my line weight for the border, because borders tend to be quite thick. So I'm going to give that a 0.7. And let's just go ahead and save this. And the next thing we'll do is take this boundary. I'll turn off ortho mode, and I'll set that boundary to almost the edge of my sheet. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that big, but for now we'll set it close to, but not completely to the edge. And the last thing we will do, we're going to set it so it doesn't plot. So I click right on that, and basically that controls the plot status. So that layer, that border of the viewport won't plot. So let me go into this viewport, So I'll double click in the viewport. And now what I'd like to do is set a scale for my print. So I'm just kind of trying to center right now. So I'm just using my middle mouse wheel, clicking and dragging. And so I have it pretty well centered. And I'd like to choose now a scale for my plot. I go down here to this area and I'll click on this down arrow. Now you'll see here I have a full selection of scales, both metric scales and imperial scales. Now sometimes, depending on how AutoCAD has been set up for you, you may not see all these. So what I suggest you do is go here to Custom, and in this dialog box you can click Reset. And once you get this Reset dialog, you can choose metric and imperial scales. Now, if you never work in one or the other, you can choose just metric or imperial, but I will choose both. So I get both, and I click OK. Now nothing changes for me, but if you had just one scale, it'll change for you. Here is where I would choose my scales. So I can choose a scale like this, let's say 1/8 of an inch. Not quite right. It's a little too small. If I chose 1 inch is equal to a foot, it's way too big. And the scale that I was going to use was this one here. 1/4 of an inch is equal to a foot. So once you have that done and you're happy with the way it's centered, something that you can do is click on this icon here, Selected Viewports. It says here, are not locked, but that's basically your lock icon for your viewport. And the advantage to that is now you won't accidentally change the scale or position of your viewport. So now you're ready to print if you want, and you can go back to the plot command and print this drawing to an 11 by 17 sheet.